The school hallway was unusually quiet that morning, the hum of distant chatter barely reaching my ears. I watched her walk slowly ahead, my disabled daughter, her fragile steps echoing off the walls. It was just another typical school day, or at least it should have been. But then, without warning, the piercing sound of her scream shattered the stillness. My heart lurched as I bolted forward, the fear clawing at my chest. In that instant, I knew something was terribly wrong. The hallway that had once felt like a place of safety now seemed like a dark, suffocating trap. I could see her struggling, crumpled against the cold tile floor, blood pooling beneath her. And standing above her, towering in cruel satisfaction, was the woman I dreaded, the HOA Karen. Her face twisted with something that wasn't just anger, but something far darker, something far more dangerous. The blood rushed in my ears as my mind raced, unable to process what was happening in front of me. Why? Why would she do this? My mind screamed for answers, but nothing made sense. She had always been cruel to my daughter, but I never imagined she was capable of this. My legs felt like lead as I rushed to her side, praying that I could reach her before it was too late. And as I held her trembling form in my arms, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. This was no longer just an incident. It was a turning point, a fight for justice, for survival, and for the truth. My daughter, Emma, has always been different. At 14, she's far more sensitive to the world around her than most kids. Her disability, cerebral palsy, means that every step she takes requires incredible effort. Her movements are slow, deliberate, and often accompanied by the weight of the stares and whispers from people who don't understand her. She has always been a fighter, though, fighting against her own body, fighting against the world that doesn't make space for people like her, and fighting for acceptance in a world that values speed, perfection, and conformity. Despite her disability, Emma is full of life. She has a kind heart and a sharp sense of humor that often goes unnoticed by her peers. Her friends, when she had them, were few but loyal. But school, the place where she should have been able to flourish, was a constant battlefield for her. The hallways, once vibrant with the chatter of students, felt like a war zone to her. A place where every misstep could result in ridicule or, worse, complete isolation. Emma's struggles weren't just physical, they were emotional too. She was bullied relentlessly, and though we tried to make it better, nothing seemed to change. Teachers would look the other way when she was taunted, and students would make cruel remarks behind her back, calling her names like cripple and slowpoke. But it wasn't just the students that made her feel unwelcome. There was one person in particular who made Emma's life a living nightmare. Linda Carter, the HOA Karen. Linda was everything Emma feared in an adult figure. She was loud, opinionated, and had a reputation for being judgmental and cruel. She lived just down the street from us, a constant presence in the neighborhood, often seen at PTA meetings and community events, where her voice was loudest, demanding things be done her way. It didn't take long for her to set her sights on Emma. From the moment Emma stepped into her line of sight, Linda had taken it upon herself to make her feel small. It started with the little things. Linda would openly stare at Emma when she entered the school, muttering under her breath, and on several occasions, I overheard her mocking Emma's slow pace. "Look at that poor girl." "So helpless," she would say to anyone who would listen. But it wasn't just the harsh words. It was the way Linda carried herself, the look of disdain on her face whenever she saw my daughter. It was like Emma's very existence was an affront to her. One day, it got worse. Emma was walking down the hallway when Linda, as if out of nowhere, stopped her. She was in her usual PDA attire, stern and unfazed by the eyes that had turned toward her. "You need to hurry up," Linda snapped, glaring down at Emma, her voice dripping with condescension. "People like you have no place slowing down everyone else." Emma, already exhausted from the effort of walking, tried to respond, but Linda's voice grew louder, crueler. Linda's torment wasn't limited to the hallway. Whenever Emma was near her, Linda would make snide comments, criticize her for taking breaks, or loudly proclaim that Emma needed special treatment. But the real issue began when Linda made it clear that Emma's disability was an inconvenience, a nuisance that was disrupting the normal flow of life. But there was a bigger issue lurking beneath the surface: Linda's power in the community. She had allies, other parents, teachers, and even school board members who thought like her, who viewed people like Emma as burdens rather than individuals with their own strengths. This unspoken alliance of like-minded individuals created an atmosphere where Linda's behavior was not just tolerated, but endorsed. Emma, already an outsider because of her disability, was left to fend for herself against a tide of cruelty that no child should have to face. And this history of torment, of emotional and verbal abuse, finally led us to that fateful day in the hallway. What was once just a distant fear in my mind, the possibility that one day Linda's cruelty would go too far, had become our reality. That morning, when Emma was walking to her next class, I had no idea that it would be the last day things were ever the same. It all happened so fast. Too fast. One moment, Emma was walking ahead of me in the school hallway, taking her usual slow and deliberate steps. The next, she screamed. Not a normal scream. A high-pitched, desperate cry that seemed to tear through the silence of the hallway like a razor-sharp blade. It was a sound I'll never forget. I was only a few steps behind her when I heard it. My heart froze in my chest and panic surged through my veins. Without thinking, I pushed through the crowd of students that had gathered, blocking my way as I rushed toward the source of the noise. My legs felt like they were moving through molasses, each step slow, each heartbeat thundering in my ears. And then I saw her. Emma was lying on the cold, hard floor, her body twisted in an unnatural way. Blood was pooling around her, dark and thick, seeping into the cracks of a tile. She wasn't crying now, not in the way I had heard her scream moments earlier. She was gasping for air, her face pale and contorted in pain. Her eyes locked with mine, wide and frightened, and for a moment, I didn't know if I was going to make it to her in time. I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands trembling as I tried to comfort her. Her breath came in shallow, labored gasps, and I could see the terror in her eyes as she struggled to move. It was like she was trapped in her own body, unable to escape the pain that seemed to radiate from her side. "Emma, sweetheart, what happened?" I whispered, my voice cracking. I tried to lift her, but she flinched and gasped again, the sharpness of her pain making me pull back instinctively. "Please, tell me what happened," I repeated, almost pleading. Her lips parted, but no words came out, only a ragged breath, and then a single word, barely a whisper. "Linda." My stomach dropped at the sound of that name. Linda Carter, the HOA Karen, had always been a source of tension in our lives, but never had I imagined she would escalate things to this level. I turned quickly, my eyes scanning the hallway for any sign of her. And there she was, standing at the far end of the corridor, watching us with an unsettling calm. Her arms were crossed over her chest, her face a cold mask of indifference. If it wasn't for the blood staining Emma's uniform, I might have thought it was just another day in school, with her lurking in the background like she always did. But this wasn't normal. This wasn't something I could ignore. "Linda," I yelled, my voice hoarse with emotion. "What the hell did you do to my daughter?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood there, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. There was something about the way she looked at us, something that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the anger in her eyes, nor the self-satisfied expression that told me she knew exactly what she had done. No, it was something far worse. It was as if she was enjoying the spectacle of Emma's suffering, as if this was exactly what she had wanted all along. She was walking too slow, Linda said, finally, her voice dripping with condescension. "She's always so slow, always in a way." I told her to hurry up, but she didn't listen. So I taught her a lesson. People like her need to learn their place. The words hung in the air, each one a dagger that pierced deeper into my chest. I could barely comprehend what she was saying. How could anyone, especially an adult, think this was acceptable? My mind screamed in disbelief, but I knew I couldn't focus on her words right now. My daughter needed me. I turned back to Emma, who was still on the floor, her body trembling with pain. She was trying to speak again, her eyes wide with fear. Mom, She was cut off by a sharp cough and more blood spilled from her mouth. Stay with me, Emma, I whispered, my hands shaking as I gently cradled her head. Stay with me, please. The hallway had become a blur of voices now. Some students had gathered around, watching in shock, while others were running toward the nearest teacher. But no one was coming to help Emma. No one was moving fast enough. I needed to get her to safety. I needed to get her medical help. But how could I move her when she could barely breathe? The blood was pooling around her, and I could see the terror in her eyes as she struggled to stay conscious. She was fading, slipping away from me, and I was powerless to stop it. Linda was still standing there, her eyes locked on me with a look of sheer disdain. It was as if she found my desperation amusing, as if she was enjoying the chaos she had created. You should have taught her better, she spat, her voice harsh. She needed to learn that people like her don't belong in the way. They don't deserve to slow everyone else down. The words felt like a slap to my face. I wanted to scream at her, to make her understand just how monstrous she was, but all I could do was hold Emma close and pray for help. The minutes stretched into eternity as I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, a teacher arrived, and then another, and a few moments later, the sound of sirens filled the hallway as an ambulance was called. But it was too late for me to process it all. All I could think of was Emma, lying there in a pool of blood, her life hanging in the balance because of a woman who had nothing but cruelty in her heart. As they rushed Emma to the hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far darker than I had ever imagined. Linda had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and I knew that this wouldn't be over until she was held accountable. But as the ambulance doors slammed shut and we sped toward the hospital, all I could think about was how close I had come to losing my daughter forever. The tension between Emma and Linda had been brewing for months before that fateful day. It wasn't something that appeared out of nowhere. It was a slow, creeping sense of dread that had been building ever since we moved into this neighborhood. I remember the first time I encountered Linda Carter. She was one of those people who made it her business to be involved in everything, whether you wanted her to be or not. It didn't take long for her to become the loudest voice in the PDA, the neighborhood watch, and the community meetings. Her presence was as undeniable as it was unbearable. From the very start, she made it clear she didn't approve of my daughter. The moment Emma started attending the local school, Linda took it upon herself to make sure everyone knew she thought Emma was a burden. Whether it was her disability or the way Emma would take her time in the hallways, Linda seemed to find any reason to make Emma feel less than everyone else. I was already used to the occasional ignorant comment here and there, the occasional whisper from the other parents, but nothing prepared me for Linda's venom. It started innocently enough, at least that's how it seemed at first. Linda would make offhand remarks when we passed her in the parking lot, saying things like, Emma should really learn to keep up. People shouldn't have to wait for her. Or, I can't imagine how hard it must be for you to manage a child who's so slow. At first, I tried to ignore it. I brushed it off as ignorance, but soon it became clear that Linda wasn't just making comments. She was actively going out of her way to make Emma's life miserable. When Emma was in the 6th grade, I remember one particular incident at the PTA meeting. Emma had been excited to show me a science project she'd worked on for weeks. She was proud of it, and rightfully so. When we walked into the crowded room, Emma slowly maneuvered through the sea of parents and teachers trying to find a place to sit. It was in those moments, when the world seemed to hold its breath in expectation, that Linda struck. As Emma made her way past her, Linda called out to her, her voice sharp and cutting. Do you really need all that space? People are waiting to sit too, you know. Maybe you should think about others for once. Linda snapped, her eyes glaring at Emma. The room had gone silent. Every head turned to look at us. Emma, who had spent the entire day working on her project, was suddenly reduced to nothing more than a target of Linda's cruel judgment. The shame that flooded Emma's face was overwhelming. She shrunk back, trying to hide behind me, her body trembling. The laughter and whispers that followed made it worse. It wasn't the first time Emma had been humiliated like this, but it was certainly the most public. I had been seething inside, but I didn't know how to respond. Linda was powerful in this community. Everyone seemed to listen to her. She had allies everywhere. Even when I tried to confront her, the other parents backed her up, acting as though I were the one overreacting. Linda is just concerned, they'd say. She only wants what's best for the community. But this wasn't concern. It was cruelty. It wasn't about the community, it was about her need to assert dominance. She saw my daughter's disability as a flaw, something to be corrected or removed. I began to realize that Linda wasn't simply making a comment or offering advice. She was pushing Emma, pushing her to the edge, trying to make her feel as small and insignificant as possible. The school year continued, and Linda's harassment didn't stop. She'd make snide comments when Emma passed by her in hallways, or glare at her when she took too long to reach a class. This school doesn't have time for slow learners, she'd mutter, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. I had tried to talk to the principal, but nothing changed. Linda's influence was too strong, and Emma's suffering seemed to be invisible to those around us. But Linda didn't just pick on Emma because of her disability. She picked on Emma because she saw in her a weakness, an opportunity to exert control. Over time, the comments became more pointed. Linda began to target Emma's every move, criticizing her for her pace, her appearance, and even her voice. Every small detail was another opportunity for Linda to remind Emma that she didn't belong. It was the little things that slowly wore down Emma's confidence. I saw it in her eyes as she started to shrink away from people. The girl who used to stand tall, proud of who she was, became more withdrawn. She began to refuse to go to school some days, her anxiety growing with every encounter she had with Linda. I knew something had to give, but I didn't expect this. I didn't expect Linda's need for control to escalate into violence. I didn't think she would actually hurt Emma. I thought if I could just avoid her, keep Emma away from her, it might be enough. But I was wrong. On that day, as Emma was walking down the hallway, Linda must have reached her breaking point. She couldn't stand the sight of Emma moving slowly, taking up space in her world, disrupting the perfect flow of her life. That's when Linda took matters into her own hands, physically attacking my daughter, not just for being slow, but for existing in a way that didn't meet her standards. What had started as a few snide remarks, a whisper here and there, had turned into something far darker. Linda's cruelty wasn't just about pushing Emma to the edge, it was about proving her power, about reminding everyone who was in control. And on that day, she chose to show just how far she was willing to go to keep her dominance intact. The seconds felt like hours as I knelt beside Emma, desperately trying to keep her conscious. Her face was pale, the blood soaking through her clothes, and the pain radiating from her was unbearable to witness. Her body trembled with every shallow breath, and it took everything within me to hold back the panic rising in my chest. My mind raced, screaming at me to do something, but what? She was fading, slipping away in my arms, and I had no way of stopping it. "Please, Emma, stay with me," I whispered, my voice cracking as I gently held her hand. Her fingers were cold, limp in mine, but her eyes, wide with fear, met mine for a brief moment. She tried to speak, her lips moving, but all that came out was a faint, choked cough, followed by a trickle of blood from her mouth. The horror of it was too much. The sheer helplessness I felt in that moment was overwhelming. My daughter, my sweet, innocent daughter, was dying in front of me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I looked around frantically, hoping someone would help, but all I saw were faces frozen in shock. Some of the other students were standing still, eyes wide in disbelief, while others seemed too afraid to move. The only one who wasn't frozen was Linda. She stood at the end of the hallway, watching the whole thing unfold with an eerie calmness. Her arms were crossed, her lips curled into a small, almost satisfied smile, and I could feel my blood begin to boil. How could she stand there so composed while my daughter fought for her life? I wanted to scream at her, to run over and demand answers, but there was no time. There was only Emma fading fast and my hands covered in her blood. I looked around again, my heart pounding in my chest as I prayed for anyone to help. It was then that I heard the sound of distant footsteps rushing toward us. Finally, the doors to the classrooms swung open, and a teacher came running down the hallway. She dropped to her knees beside me, her face a mask of shock and disbelief as she saw the blood and Emma's weakened state. "Call an ambulance," she shouted, her voice shaking. "Someone call 911." I didn't even need to hear the words. I had already done it, my fingers dialing the emergency number while I held Emma's hand, my eyes never leaving her face. Every breath she took seemed harder than the last, and I could feel the panic clawing at my throat as I tried to steady myself. The teacher turned to the other students, her voice shaking but authoritative. "Get out of the way. Clear the hall. We need space." A few of the students moved quickly, but Linda remained where she was, watching the scene unfold as though it were some sort of spectacle. Her eyes never left Emma and me, a strange, cold amusement in them that made my skin crawl. I couldn't understand it. Why wasn't she doing anything? Why was she just standing there, so detached from the gravity of what she had caused? But the ambulance was coming. I could hear the sirens now, getting louder, closer, and it gave me a small sliver of hope. Help was on the way. They were coming to save her. But even as I clung to that hope, I knew there was something worse yet to come. The emotional toll the damage Linda had done, not just physically but to Emma's spirit, to our family, it was something we might never fully recover from. The paramedics arrived in what felt like an eternity, rushing in with their bags, shouting orders as they knelt beside Emma. One of them began to assess her wounds, while the other placed an oxygen mask over her face. I watched, helpless, as they worked to stabilize her. I felt like I was drowning in the chaos of it all, the beeping of the monitors, the shuffling of feet, the sound of the stretcher being rolled toward the exit. But through all the chaos, one thing was clear. Linda was still watching. As the paramedics took Emma away, I turned to look at her, unable to hold back my anger any longer. She had done this. She had hurt my daughter, and yet she stood there unmoved as if nothing had happened. I moved toward her, my heart pounding in my chest as I grabbed her arm. "What did you do?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fury. "What kind of person are you to hurt a child like that?" Linda's gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something, a slight shift in her expression. But it wasn't guilt. It wasn't remorse. It was something else. Something darker. "You don't understand," she said, her voice unervingly calm. She needed to learn her place. People like her, they hold everyone back. They don't belong in the way. She was a distraction. The words hit me like a physical blow. She was a distraction? I could barely process the malice in her voice. She was a distraction? My body trembled with rage, but I was too shocked to say anything more. What could I even say to someone who had so completely lost their humanity? And just as quickly as the words came, Linda turned on her heel, walking away with no remorse, no sense of the gravity of what she had done. She walked as if she hadn't just stabbed a child, as if she hadn't just left Emma to die. But in that moment, as I watched her walk away, I realized something deeper, something more chilling. Linda's cruelty wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment, it was part of her. It was who she was. She thrived on control, on demeaning others, on making people feel small. And Emma's life, her well-being, had been nothing more than an inconvenient afterthought in Linda's mind. I watched as the ambulance doors closed, as they took Emma away to the hospital. A sense of numbness washed over me. But deep down, I knew one thing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Linda had made a choice to cross a line she could never uncross. And no matter what it took, I was going to make sure she faced the consequences. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, tense conversations, and a flood of emotions that I had trouble keeping in check. The moment the ambulance doors had closed, I felt as though a part of me had been ripped away, leaving me hollow and numb. Emma was rushed into surgery to repair the damage done to her side, and for hours I sat in that sterile waiting room, my thoughts racing, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't process what had happened, how we had gone from an ordinary day to a nightmare. When the surgeon finally came to speak to me, I could hardly bring myself to look at her. The words she spoke were a blur, but the meaning was clear. Emma had survived, but her injuries were severe. The stab wound had punctured her lung, and she'd lost a significant amount of blood. It wasn't just a physical injury, it was an emotional wound that would take far longer to heal. I was told she'd be in the hospital for several more days, monitored closely, and that we would need to support her through the long road ahead. As the days went by, Emma's physical recovery progressed. The bruises faded, the stitches healed, and the swelling in her face went down. But the mental scars were another matter entirely. She barely spoke about what happened, avoiding the topic altogether. The trauma had left a deep mark on her. I could see it in the way she flinched when a loud sound startled her, the way her eyes darted around a room to make sure she wasn't being watched. She was no longer the bright, confident girl who had entered that school. She was a shadow of herself, hesitant, afraid, and far too quiet. It was clear that Linda's cruelty had shattered something in Emma's spirit. The very idea of going back to school, of facing the people who had witnessed the attack, was more than she could bear. She refused to leave the house, locking herself away in her room. The pain in her eyes, her fear, her anxiety was unbearable. As her mother, I felt as though I had failed her. I couldn't protect her from the world, from the people who should have cared for her and kept her safe. I felt the weight of the injustice pressing down on me every single day. But even as I watched my daughter suffer, a fire began to build inside me. This wasn't just about Emma anymore. It wasn't just about the scars she carried. It was about making sure that Linda, the woman who had caused this pain, would never be allowed to hurt anyone again. This had to be more than just a fleeting moment of anger. It had to be justice. I contacted the authorities immediately after the attack, and after months of legal battles, Linda was charged with aggravated assault. The trial was a process that took everything out of me. Every day in court was a battle of wills. Linda, with her smug, arrogant attitude, tried to play the victim, insisting that Emma had provoked her, that it was all a misunderstanding. Her defense lawyer, equally as cold and calculated, tried to paint my daughter as an inconvenience to the community, someone who was a burden on those around her. It was a game to them, a chance to twist the truth and distort the facts. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I took the stand, and for the first time, I found my voice. I spoke about Emma, about her spirit, her kindness, her strength. I spoke about the pain she had endured, the toll this attack had taken on her, and the damage it had done to our family. I looked Linda in the eye, and for the first time, I saw fear in her gaze. It wasn't the fear of being caught or exposed, it was the fear of knowing that, for once, she would have to face the consequences of her actions. But Linda's arrogance didn't fade. Even as the trial moved forward, she remained defiant. She was a woman who had spent her entire life controlling others, pushing people down, and bending the world to her will. For her, this was a minor inconvenience, something she could shake off like a bad memory. But the more I fought, the more I realized how deep her cruelty ran, how far she would go to maintain her power. The final verdict came months later, after the emotional exhaustion had taken its toll. Linda was found guilty of aggravated assault and sentenced to a lengthy prison term, though it didn't feel like enough. How could a few years of prison ever make up for the damage she'd caused? How could justice ever be served when Emma's life had been irreparably changed by one woman's cruelty? Even with Linda behind bars, the pain lingered. Emma was still afraid to leave the house, still hesitant to trust people, and the weight of it all hung over us. The community, once a source of support, had turned its back on us. Some people were too afraid to speak out, while others still believed Linda was the victim. It was a reminder that justice, in its purest form, isn't always enough. But there was a turning point. Slowly, over time, Emma began to open up again. With the support of her therapists, her friends, and most importantly me, she started to heal. The road was long, and there were days when it felt impossible, but Emma was stronger than I had ever given her credit for. She began to speak more about what had happened, to share her fears and her dreams, and little by little, the pieces of her confidence returned. The emotional fallout from Linda's attack was far from over, but we were moving forward. For the first time in a long while, Emma began to leave the house again to go back to school with the support of her family and a few close friends. She was no longer the timid girl she once was. She had fought back in her own way, through her healing, through her strength, and through the people who stood by her side. I had learned, too, that justice isn't just about a verdict or a sentence. It's about how we rebuild, how we find the strength to move forward, even when it feels impossible. Linda had caused us immense pain, but she hadn't broken us. And in the end, that was the true victory. As the months passed and the trial came to an end, I thought the worst was over. I thought I could finally breathe again, that we could heal from the nightmare Linda had brought into our lives. But deep down, something inside me still felt unsettled. There was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly finished, that Linda's dark influence still loomed over us. And then one night it happened. I received a phone call, just the sound of a single ring, but everything changed in that moment. The voice on the other end was familiar, but not one I expected to hear again. It was someone from the community, someone who had been keeping secrets all along. They told me something that shook me to my core, something I wasn't ready to hear. Linda's reach had extended further than I could have ever imagined. I felt the ground beneath me shift. The woman who had caused my daughter so much pain, so much suffering, was far from defeated. In fact, this was only the beginning of a much darker chapter one hadn't foreseen. I stared at the phone in my hand, my mind racing. Could I protect Emma from this new threat? Would justice ever truly prevail? The answers were unclear, but one thing was certain: this fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. If you believe in justice and you're ready to see Linda face what she truly deserves, hit that subscribe button. Join me as we expose the truth, fight for what's right, and make sure no one else has to suffer at the hands of people like her. Together, we can make sure this never happens again.